Hello, everyone. I'm Francis Seeley from GlobalNet 21 and Enfield Voices, and this is one of the interviews that we now do regularly and involves people who are making a difference in their locality or involved in a campaign, developing a social enterprise, but are doing something that is important to know about. And today we've got Lynda Brennan who's with us, and Lynda has started the Enfield Stop Racism group, which is actually called Enfield Stand Up to Racism. And she's going to tell us about the work that they're doing and why they started. So Lynda, thank you for joining us today and for taking part in this. And can I ask you, first of all, tell us about what that group is. What is the Enfield Stand Up to Racism group?
It's a new group, but it's part of a big national movement. Stand Up to Racism and Fascism is organising in Enfield and bringing people together to be part of the opposition to the growing threat of the far right. We've so far had a lot of support and a lot of success. We organised a stall in Palmer's Green, and we're really surprised by how many people stopped and talked. We've got an important meeting next Tuesday, November the 13th at 7:30 at the mosque in Rainham Road in Edmonton, at the community space there, where we've got a large panel of speakers, including Kate Osmore, including the convener of the SUTR, including a speaker from Jewish Voice for Labour, a very wide selection, and of course somebody from the mosque itself. We're working towards the national demonstration, which is on November the 17th.
Okay, so it is a national organisation, isn't it? Because you mentioned the national demonstration. Why did you think you had to start a local branch here in Enfield?
I think there's a huge need to bring people together, different communities together, who are at threat of racism and fascism. There's numerous people in Enfield, I'm sure they've been on Enfield Voices, who might be documenting experiences of racism. The difference is we want to bring together a very visible presence, so different communities actually know that other communities are experiencing similar and that they can count on people for support, rather than it being in separate little groups.
I mean, do you think there are any specific problems in Enfield and that you want to confront those, or are you just part of a national campaign?
I think specifically we've been in touch with people with Campaign for Racial Equality in Enfield. We've been in touch with 2 mosques and working with councillors in Enfield who update me on specific incidents of racism. So we want to build, we're at the very beginning, so although we're part of the national movement, we know there are definitely issues in Enfield that we need a greater presence on. And again, I say we're going to want to come together to form a united front of support and sharing our experiences so we can fight this threat, and that is particular in Enfield. We're in touch with the African Caribbean Society, we're in touch with the synagogue, and we're in touch with, at the moment, 2 mosques that we will be interested in working with.
So tell us a bit about yourself. I mean, why have you personally got involved? What's your background that's led you to this?
I was a teacher for 30 years in Haringey, Hackney and Islington. I was a drama teacher. I love my work. I then became a teacher in charge of inclusion. I suppose my passion is about how to keep young people in schools, and I'm daunted by seeing so many out on the streets, off-rolled, excluded, often with very few places to go, or alternatively, pupil referral units being almost like a hotbed of greater activity, so that the young people have no hope and they're on the streets. So I look at this situation, and some of that concern about young people and knife crime and so on has spilled over to me wanting to build a movement that combats all forms of racism. Also, I was involved in the 70s with the Anti-Nazi League. I was in Teachers Against the Nazis. I had young people in my schools that were in Kids Against the Nazis. The point is about the Anti-Nazi League was it was a massive political and cultural movement. Again, I repeat the word visible, very, very visible. So that, and we did win in the 70s. It does need to be said that our efforts drove the fascists, the far right, the racists off the streets. The fact they are now rearing their heads again means to me that we've got to start the process again. And John MacDonald actually was the first person to say, we need another anti-Nazi league. I recently just on that point, went to a conference for Stand Up to Racism, and Diane Abbott herself said, we don't need one or two or three movements, we need one united movement. And that inspired me to start in Enfield.
The people you mentioned, Diane Abbott, John MacDonald, they all seem to come from the left of the Labour Party. I mean, how inclusive are you as an organisation? Because if you're going to stand up for racism in our modern day, you've got to involve everyone. And how can you convince people you're not just a left-wing fringe group?
Well, I think by our actions, we want to form a united front. We want every religious group. We want we want to fight against Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, but also attacks on the left as well, and not attacks on trade union movement, attacks on many of the things that gives us the infrastructure of the society that we live in, plus safeguards. I think there is no person that this movement would not welcome in with open arms if they were against racism and against the working towards the fighting the threat of the far right. So it's
if any members of the Tory party or the Liberal Democrat Party or Greens or anyone wanted to come in, you would welcome them and you wouldn't make
we would welcome them
strangers.
We would welcome them, absolutely. However, as in this group, it would be worth saying that there is the issue that the present government, Theresa May, has brought about, which is the hostile environment. That doesn't mean at all that any individual Tory signs up to that or agrees with that. But nevertheless, that's one of the main reasons we're confronting racism today, is that the climate was set and still is being set of a hostile environment. And it's in this soil that racism and fascism grows.
Okay, you mentioned quite interestingly that in Enfield that you're very concerned about gang culture and so on. Is there a relationship between...
Sorry, I didn't quite catch that, Francis.
You mentioned that you were very interested in gang culture in Enfield.
Oh, yes.
And is there a relationship, do you think, between gang culture and racism?
I don't think so. I think that all our young people suffer from it. I think that white young men as well as black young men are involved in this, and I think that it's a national crisis, and I think that we need to do something about it. No, I don't think that that is racial. I think we're all caught up in it. We all need to do something about it.
Okay, now you say, I mean, you're part of a national organisation, and you know, when you were in the Anti-Nazi League and I was forming the Enfield Committee for Racial Harmony here in the 1970s, we were trying to contain the growth of the National Front, and it was a very particular British problem. Now, according to your website for your national group, you're looking at the rise of fascism across Europe. And is this something that really concerns you, that we might be going back to the 1930s, where we're seeing in Europe the rise of xenophobia and racism and indeed fascism?
I think it's hugely concerning, and also, of course, in the United States. So just before I go into Europe, I'd like to obviously mention the latest attack on the Pittsburgh synagogue, the Tree of Good Hope, where 11 people have just been murdered. And clearly, Trump's views have again sown the seeds for this this anti-Semite who also hated Muslims and migrants as well. But the Trump administration, including Stephen Bannon, who still has a influence across Europe and in the UK, has set the seeds for this to grow. It was the worst anti-Semitic attack in the United States. Now, across Europe, almost in any Western European country, we find the existence of fascists now, open fascists. The most obvious one being Orban in Hungary, but we've got the Freedom Party in Austria, and we've got the AfD in Germany. However, just on the German example, 250,000 people marched through Berlin in opposition to it. So, but I do think we have to be really worried and concerned about the growth right across Europe. And then we arrive in the UK, where, of course, we've got Stephen Yaxley-Lennon, aka Tommy Robinson, who has brought about, through a whole series of support from Bannon, who's brought about a beginnings of a popular movement with the Democratic Football Lads Alliance. And this is incipient fascism. We shouldn't pretend. He is working into people's fears about Muslims. He's working on people's fears, but we've had 10 years of austerity. So of course people have fears about their families, their children, their houses, their jobs, economic security, food security. People have suffered under austerity for 10 years. So there are plenty fears for the fascists and Tommy Robinson to start manipulating on. We need to be wise to it, see where it's coming from, and stand up against it.
You mentioned Europe and, you know, the Ukraine as well, where there's a lot of fascist and Nazi activity. And their racism, a lot of that is racism against migrants coming in from the Middle East, but also anti-Semitism. And in a way, that's a problem here. I mean, it's sort of muddied the water on the left of British politics, isn't it? Because some people are so passionate in their dislike of Israel that it sort of spills over into anti-Semitism. And you must find that a problem and an embarrassing situation to have to deal with as well.
I don't find it embarrassing in the least. I find it that the Labour Party has made it quite clear that it is against all forms of racism, including anti-Semitism. Not only that, we have the Chakrabarti report. We've consistently responded, the leadership included, and made it absolutely clear that where there is anti-Semitism, where there is racism, it will be dealt with. Now, the Labour Party at the moment is the biggest social democratic party in Europe. Where there is anti-Semitism, if, as you say, it tips over into, we're accused of it tipping over into criticism of Israel, we must be free to be able to criticize the nation state of Israel and its actions, including the actions against Palestinians. We mustn't conflate what essentially is anti-Zionism or anti-Israel or anti-Netanyahu with anti-Semitism. And this is the thing that we need to untangle. I feel it has been weaponized. I think that what Stand Up to Racism is trying to do is say that there is anti-Semitism, which is nothing whatsoever to do with Israel. In this, I go back to the Pittsburgh case of the terrible shootings, where clearly the perpetrator, the shooter, came from the far right. And the point is whether Jewish people support Israel or don't support Israel or are critical of Israel. The point is, they found themselves to be the victims of anti-Semitism. And that's what Sutra is all about. We're looking at what's going on now. Yeah.
So, I mean, someone's just said this isn't really a Labour Party debate. This is a debate against racism, and to some extent, you know, it's beginning to sound like it's a Labour Party thing. This is a general thing that affects everyone in society, and we've got to get everyone involved, don't we? And how do we create a language that will involve everyone and not make everyone feel, oh, it's a Labour Party taking the lead, or it's a Labour Party is guilty of anti-Semitism. How do we involve everyone?
I think that's a really good question, and that is the task, because first of all, today you could argue that there's a lot of identity politics, and I think in many ways Sutra is about the opposite of that. It's looking at what we've got in common, and our language has got to follow that. It's really about what kind of society we all want to live in. And I don't know if you've read The Spirit Level, but there's a very strong argument that the more democratic, the greater equality, the more caring our society, it actually is a better society for everybody. And I think that that to me is a core belief of the Stand Up to Racism. There will be a common language, but we can't be complacent about it. We've got to build it. It's not there at the moment. We're so atomized because of austerity and so on. I think we need to learn that language anew.
Yeah, okay, I'll come back to identity politics in a minute, but someone's just said, what about institutional racism? For example, Stop and Search is so focused on the Black community that it makes them feel marginalized and different and really, you know, sort of persecuted in a way. Do you take those issues on as well?
Yes, where it's so obvious, it's been proved again and again that Black people and Black communities feel utterly furious at the racism that is coming their way, and very unlistened to, and it's pushed down the list of priorities. And of course, as I said, the Windrush scandal has exposed the level of quite institutional racism, or going back to schools, Francis, the disproportionate number of Black young people that are excluded or put out into off-rolled in various ways. So this needs to be talked about, and part of that is that they do feel completely victimized by the disproportionate stop and search that comes their way. I saw a video in Enfield in the half term where a group of 12-year-old young Black boys were being stopped by the police, kept there for nearly an hour and a half outside a tube station. This was their half term. They'd done nothing. And I saw one of the boys, his face turned from near tears into anger. I could see the face changing as I was watching. So I am critical. We are critical of anything that wrongly picks out and institutionalizes racism.
Okay, let's go to this, you know, what racism is today. And it seems to me that, and I don't know whether you agree with this, that racism is a much more complex issue than it was for us back in the 1970s, days of the Anti-Nazi League and so on. Do you feel it is more complex today?
I do think that identity politics helps the right rather than the left. I do feel that identity politics are not fully the answer, and I feel that what's needed is for us to find our common humanity and fight it together. Now, to me, Sutra is the vehicle to do that. You've said yourself, I mean, we need to be as inclusive as possible and find a language that is understandable and communicates with everybody. But that is the challenge.
I mean,
In other ways,
the problem is, let me put this to you. I mean, the thing about identity politics is that we all have multiple identities nowadays.
of
I
course.
mean, you could be a Turkish, an Afro-Caribbean, or an Indian, and you are third generation, and your views are not at all like your parents or grandparents. You mix with white people, you belong to a book group, you belong to a campaigning group, you have all these different identities. And this, and there are all sorts of different groups in society now, often in competition with each other. And so we can't confront racism in the same way as we can, because there is a lot of prejudice around, there's a lot of hope as well. So, I mean, do we need to get into a process of dialogue to tackle that?
I think we do. I think all communities need to have a space where there's greater dialogue and building greater trust between us. I think communities and investing in communities is hugely important. I don't think we can do many politics of any kind while our communities remain broken communities up and down the country, devastated by austerity, loss of jobs, loss of traditional jobs. I think we've got to start to build that process in our communities and be strong. But the point is about Sutra is the threat of the far right, the threat of racists is there now. So this has to happen urgently. Just that, yeah.
Well, okay, it does. I mean, Amartya Sen in his book Identity and Violence talks about actually the multiple identities and the need to coming together. And Hannah Dyson's just said, you know, we have to look at can these communities be integrated more? So will be one of the jobs of your group in Enfield to create that dialogue, not just to stand up and be negative and attack racists, but to be positive and bring groups together and get them to talk. Will you be doing that?
Yes, good point. When we have our meeting next week at the mosque, it's important to say it's in the community room space of the mosque, which Brother Tariq, in fact, is welcoming people from different races, different ethnic backgrounds, different religions in. We've also got some, we also recognize that in all these comings together, we miss out young people very often. And I'm certainly saying that young people have got the answers to a lot of the way that we need to work with this movement to make it into a large cultural movement with its own language, with its own values, and with its own positivity. So one of the jobs I see the Enfield Sutra group doing is involving young people from all backgrounds and starting that dialogue. I think Hannah is completely right.
And how do you aim to do that?
We're in touch at the moment with a couple of young people who came to our meetings. One is in school, the other is at the local college. We want to upskill ourselves so we can go around and talk and so on, but we also want different activities. I mean, one idea, just an interesting idea, is that we tap into that the park runs, and we're going to have a kind of fundraiser for a 5 mile or a 10K run. So I think this has got to be broad and spread right across the cultural spectrum. Music is obviously hugely important. Myself and one of the councillors, we're going to a boxing match next week and hoping to open some dialogue with some of the young men that are there.
Okay, you talked about identity politics again, and in his book, What is Populism, Jan Werner Muller said, wherever there is identity politics, there is always populism. And his argument, and I'd like to see what you think about this, is that often, Owen Jones, a left-winger, said this in his book Chavs, when you have the white working class who feel they're deprived, they see people developing identity politics, whether it's gender, whether it's race or whatever. They don't have any identity politics to go to, because they feel if they do, they'll be accused of racism. So they're laying there, and when populism comes along, I found somewhere that can give me my identity. I'll follow the right-wing populist movements. Now, have we ignored the white working class for too long? And is that a problem you're going to face in your group? Have you sort of addressed it? How do we address it?
Yeah, I think there's 2 points. One is that I'd like to say, I think it's useful in this discussion to talk about the white working class, but I have to say, I think it's more useful to talk about the working class, because otherwise we can easily and wrongly fall into the idea that a non-university educated white person has stereotypical views. And I think we need to combat that idea. I think that it's not at all automatic that a white young man or a white young woman automatically goes to far-right politics. That's not denying where Tommy Robinson, etc., has his base and who it's based on. But I think we should see that as manipulation and actually the creation of the soil whereby that flourishes. Now, if summed up to racism, and I think it's really important that we do go to young people, black and white, Asian heritage, and actually say this is their home too. Ask what they feel about their own lives, about what they want. Let's not assume automatically that they're Islamophobic or that they're anti-black. So I think it's of huge importance what you're saying, but I think we need to reframe the discussion around it. And that's why the councillor and I, by the way, are going to look at this boxing club, and we're definitely going to try and build up so that the SUTR is a home and a place that white working class people are listened to and respected.
Yeah, one of the things people have said on our chats and so on is one of the things which has led to racism is too extreme puritanical political correctness. Political correctness is okay up to a point, but when you call a person a racist for anything he or she might say, or a sexist, come to that, then you get a counter reaction. You turn people away, you make them go to the other side. Have we got to be a bit more careful about this?
Well, of course, we do need to call out racism where we see it. I think that the positive dialogue that you've referred to has got to be the first priority in stand up to racism. So I would question really the use of the word political correctness. Because usually, if one delves into political correctness, you usually see that, in fact, it was racist or it was sexist. I think having a go at political correctness actually minimises the effect of serious hate crime on the streets, which we all can suffer from, and we all do suffer. It lowers our ability to fight back. So I see what you're saying.
I mean, there is on Enfield Voices, for example, occasions when people call someone a racist who's not racist at all, or a sexist and they're not a sexist at all. It's a way of attacking someone you don't agree with. And that's what I think people object to. And that drives people into the racist camp. It does the opposite of what people want.
Yes. I do believe in free speech, but I think free speech has limits. I think it has limits. So I think that we need to be careful of our language so that we don't deliberately hurt people and drive them away. I think it's an issue, but as I said, I mean, people's hurt needs to be part of this discussion. And going back to it, the communities need to come together and get a dialogue so that they're not integrated, but they're respectfully listening to each other.
That's an important statement.
There is a need for discussion. I do agree with that.
Yeah, but what you said, I think, is important. People's hurt have got to be a part of this discussion.
Yes.
And that's the sort of Bishop Desmond Tutu and Nelson Mandela's approach of reconciliation and so on. And is that an approach you're looking at, how you reconcile people who have been angry and you bring them together?
That would be what we're aiming at. We can't do, clearly, our little group cannot do that alone, but that would be our goal. And we need different, my view is that all communities, not only the white community, need to reach out to other communities. And that is definitely the values that I understand the sutra embodies.
Okay, well, we're sort of coming to the end of this, but let me ask you, if people want to get in touch with you and be involved, how do they do it?
We've got an email which is Enfield, SUTR, at gmail.com.
Enfield, SUTR, at gmail.com.
That's right.
Okay.
Also, I'll just say again, November the 13th, if they were to come along to the community space at the mosque in Rainham Road at 7:30, there'll be a group of us from the Enfield group, and we're there ready to talk, ready to listen, ready to try to move ahead with a lot more activities. And November the 17th, of course, we've arranged all kinds of meeting places so that as a group from Enfield, we can go together. No one should be left on their own to feel frightened or worried or anxious about going to something. So I would say, come along and let's talk, let's discuss, and let's organize.
Okay. All right. Well, we've come to the end of this, so thank you very much for doing that. We've exhausted you, exhausted me, I'm sure. It's been really interesting, and I think you've given a lot of people a lot of things to think about. So thank you, and I'm sure we'll talk to you again in the future. So thanks for joining us, and we'll end this interview now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye-bye.